Hey everyone, this is Corey. Before we get into today's episode, I want to say something about the person you're about to hear from. If you've spent any time in the DNA surprise, adoptee, or donor-conceived communities, there's a very good chance you've heard the name DNAngels. And if you've heard that name, then you've probably heard about the woman behind it, Laura Olmsted. Laura is a genetic genealogist who has helped thousands of people uncover the truth about their biological families. We're talking adoptees, NPEs, donor-conceived people, those who took a DNA test and suddenly realized their life story didn't quite add up. Laura and her team step in and help solve these mysteries. But what makes this conversation especially powerful is that Laura didn't start out as an expert. She started out exactly where many of our listeners begin, taking a DNA test out of curiosity and discovering something that completely changed how she understood her family. In this episode, Laura walks us through that moment, the long process of uncovering the truth about her biological father, and the complicated emotions that came with learning the answers years too late. And then we talk about what happened next, how the experience led her to create DNAngels, which has now helped solve more than 9,000 cases around the world. It's a story about secrets, persistence, and what can happen when someone decides to turn their own discovery into something that helps thousands of other people. Here's our conversation with Laura Olmsted. Laura, welcome to the Family Twist podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into your story, it's just exciting to see the work that DNAngels has done over the last 6 years. For those who don't know, Laura is the founder, and prediction that you might hit 10,000 this year.
We're over 9,000 now, or really close to 9,000. We do about anywhere between 1,300 and 1,500 a year for the last 3 years. So I'm going to say, yeah, we'll hit our 10,000 this year.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's incredible, especially because it's so needed because more and more people are making their discoveries every day,
Yeah.
How many folks does DNAngels have now with your board and volunteers?
I actually eliminated a department. So we had about 100 volunteers, but we have fine-tuned our process so much that we're down to about 60 volunteers. But I say that's a good 60 because we're international now. So we went international last year. And so we've got boots on the ground doing this work and representing the UK, Ireland, Scotland, Australia. That's about in Canada.
Yeah. Because there are people like I made all these connections when my DNA matched, but nobody was willing to talk to me. So it was like, it was really frustrating at well, it still is, but it was particularly frustrating when I could see all these names and people just wouldn't admit that they knew who my mother was. You know what I mean? It was like pretty obvious I'm part of this family. Look at all the connections, but they just either some of them didn't know, the whole story because I was given up for adoption, or they just didn't want to get involved.
Well, they inadvertently become secret keepers. They don't want to even. So I say in my situation, I didn't create the bomb. I just uncovered the bomb. Well, the people that are walking by looking at that bomb don't want to set that bomb off by sharing the information. So I understand. But for other people who are not faced with adoption, but have like an NPE in their story, and someone may be looking at your tree and their tree and they don't see the connection, maybe they just don't want to, tell you. Obviously, something's wrong with your tree. I want to say that there are tips and tricks to getting people to respond. It's really in the delivery of the message that you're sending. And also, we find that 10 to 20% more people respond if you have an actual photo of yourself on your profile. That makes you real.
I completely believe that. And I don't know why I didn't. You know what I mean? Like I didn't. I wasn't even thinking in that vein when this was all happening way back 8 years ago. But I even thought later myself, like, well, these people don't know who I am. They don't, so it would have probably helped.
And there are photos out there on social media of the folks that, Kendall has met. on that side. And so, I'm sure they've been seeing,
Right. Right.
here we are still in the middle of this all these many years later, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
So, Laura, can you kind of take us back to that fateful time when you decided to do a DNA test?
I was actually making a family history book for my grandchildren for Christmas. I started 6 months early. I was going to make them a family history scrapbook for Christmas because my aunt had given me one. And it really is what turned me on to researching genealogy and stuff like that. And so I had built out a big old tree, and I'm like, I'm going to take one of these DNA tests at Ancestry just to see how much, English we have. And we came over from England. And of course, it's quite clear that my mother's family is English or Ireland and Scottish. She's just, everybody's a redhead. So I took a DNA test, and I actually let it sit on my counter for like 6 weeks. I didn't even process it. And then one day I was looking at my husband. I'm like, we got these DNA tests. Let's take these tests, because he is Lithuanian and we wanted to look into his family history as well. So we did, and we got the DNA results back within like a day of each other. And I was looking, and I'm like, I don't recall quite how quickly I freaked out, but I was excited. I wanted to look at my results right away. And I saw lots of people that I recognized from my mom's side of the family. I'm like, I don't understand why I'm not seeing my cousins. And then I thought, well, let me just look up some ancestors' names. So I did some surname searches, and I'm like, okay, well, I see it. But I didn't realize at the time that a 20 centimorgan match is like 6 generations away.
Right.
So I was feeling relieved, and then I'm like, no, something just didn't feel right here. So I called cousin, and I'm like, did you take a DNA test with Ancestry? I could have swore you said you did. And she's like, yeah. And she looked it up, and she's like, I don't see you as a match. And I'm like, I got my matches right here. And so it started dawning on me that, okay, that little rumor, because I had an aunt when I was younger share with me that my father that raised me was sterile and none of us were his kids. And I'm like, well, that is just horrifying. Why would you say something like that to me? And I didn't believe her. I just thought she was a big old troublemaker, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like her for the rest of my life. And it just kind of dawned on me in that moment. I had that aha moment, right? Maybe my dad isn't my dad. And then I'm like, well, who are these people? Because you can clearly see matches to your known side if you were raised by a parent that, gave birth to you. And I had one match at 455 centimorgans. And if for those who don't know, that's like a second cousin. But what it really was a first cousin once removed. So it was on my biological side, it was my dad's brother's daughter's child. So it was down a couple of generations, but that really was the highest match. And so I reached out to her, and I said, I don't know. Actually, I don't even remember what I said. I'm sure it was the wrong thing to say. I'm pretty sure I said something like, hi, I don't know how we're related, but I'd love to figure it out. And she wrote back and she said, I don't know how we're related either, but I'd be happy to help you. And so we just got to talking, and she said, my dad's adopted, so I'm pretty sure you're from my dad's side of the family. And I want to preface that with, because my family tree didn't match her family tree, she just assumed I was on her dad's side of the tree because he was adopted. So my biological father's family is from my area, but they had moved when he was a child to a northern part of the state. And so it made sense that I would be related to biological father for her because they're from my neck of the woods. And so I literally was calling these people and talking to them. They were really nice and telling me all about their family. And they said they didn't, know what the connection was, but they'd be happy to help me too. And then I went to her one day and I said, it just doesn't feel right, And she said, you know what? I was looking at my stuff the other day, and the interesting thing is you also match this person, and this person, and that's my mom's side of the tree. And I said, well, tell me about your mom. And so she told me about her mom because her mom didn't play a large role in her life either. And so we were able to figure out that her grandfather, who she also didn't know, her mother's father, was the link. Once I figured that out and I found out who his parents were, that was my home run. Because that is actually how you solve a case. You have to go from the top down and then start narrowing it down.
Sure.
But there was a family rumor in his family too, that one of the boys was not a full brother because they said grandma had messed around. They had no evidence of that. That's just what they said. I said, okay, well, I'm looking at these 3 boys. Your grandfather is this guy. We're close enough related that maybe your grandpa is my dad. And then he's got a brother that died when he was 43, and I would have been 13 at the time. And then he's got another brother who would have been 5 years younger than my mom. So I don't believe it's the younger brother who's also potentially a half brother. Now we're down to 2. It could be the living man who is your grandfather or his brother who died when I was 13. So she shared his phone number with me and I called him. And I left a message saying I was doing genealogy and I would love to learn more about the family. No return call. I called him the next day. Same message. Hey, this is Laura. Understand you're the family historian. But I thought for sure you would call me back. Nothing. So I gave it a couple of days because I didn't want to appear over aggressive. And then I said, that's it. I'm calling back. And so I did leave a message this next time. And I said, look, this is Laura again. I think you're my dad. Can you please call me back? Like I had had enough. I'm so frustrated. And he called me within an hour. And he said, honey, what's your mother's name? And I told him, and he says, well, I know her really well. And I'm like, I started having tears just streaming down my face.
Yeah.
I did. I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to my biological dad. Because I had lost my other daddy that raised me like 12 years ago before the test. So it had went through my mind that maybe I have a second chance at having a dad, that's living still. And he was so kind. You could hear the kindness in his voice. And he's like, now what year were you born? And I told him, and he says, well, honey, I was married at that time and I did not do anything outside of the marriage. He said, but I do know that my brother Freddie had a relationship with your mom as well. And I'm like, okay, but then his brother Freddie did. And I'll have you know that my mother was married this entire time. He said, you must be Freddie's baby. And he said, do you mind if I reach out to Freddie's widow and let her know about you? And I said, sure, that'd be great. And so just a little bit later that day, she left a message on my Facebook public wall that said, hey, this is Judy. I have answers that you've been searching for all your life. Mm-hmm. My number is such and such. And she put that out in the public. So I called her and I said, thanks so much for reaching out. I have not been searching all of my life. I just found this out a couple of weeks ago. And she said, well, honey, before your dad died, my husband, your mother had called our house and told him that she had a little girl. And he said, I'm so sorry, Judy, I have cancer and I'm literally going to die imminently. I am dying right now. And he said, apparently they talked about it. And he said, I really don't want you to tell her about me right now because she's just lost one father to divorce. And for her to find out that she has a different dad and then he's dead would be horrible. So I guess that's the agreement they came to. She sent him some pictures because the widow said that she found pictures of me in her husband's safe at work. So apparently they had a little bit of correspondence after that. But the widow said that he died literally within like 2 weeks of that phone call.
Wow. Do you regret not getting to?
Oh, every day. I wish, the thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts on. I wish that my parents would have realize that they don't have ownership of me, that love is love, and we have the capacity to love multiple children as parents, right? Why do the children not have the capacity to love multiple parents? And I think because I don't think there is a full bar to love. Like, you can't say that you should love me more because I'm your mother. Just let people, get to know the biological people in their life, and they'll make that decision on their own. And even if they made that decision when I was 13 because he was dying, I was 48 when I made this discovery. When was I old enough to know my truth?
So did you confront your mother about this?
I have to preface that by saying my mother has mental health issues. She doesn't live in the here and now. She lives in her own world. And so when I asked her about it, she said, Charles is your dad, and he's the only dad you're ever going to know. So I had to come at it a different way, right? I couldn't come in it as a confrontation because she told me that I'm a troublemaker, and I've always been a troublemaker. And so I said, all right, we're going to have this big old birthday party for Mom because she was turning 75 or something. And so everybody was there. And so I was sitting down showing some pictures to someone, and she says, she saw the picture and she's like, well, I know that man. That's Freddie. I said, it is. And she's like, well, where did you get those pictures? I said, well, from these boys, because Freddie had 6 boys, 5 with his widow, and then another outside child like me. She said, those are Freddie's boys. I said, yeah. And she says, well, did you know that Freddie's sister died because of anesthesia? And I said, I do. I do know that, Mom. Do you remember when I was 17 and in the hospital having a surgery, and I had a reaction to anesthesia and woke up in ICU with 3 IVs going full bore in me, and ice trying to cool my core temperature down? She just ignored it. She redirected because she just wanted to keep talking about Freddie and his family and now how they were good friends. And I'm like, yeah, you were good friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Friends with benefits.
They were. My mom and my dad that raised me had large issues with alcohol. So they frequented bars a lot. Like, I even remember that as a child, and then they got sober, which was great. But in the meantime, my mother had 4 children, all while married to my dad, who was in fact sterile. All 4 of us have a different dad. None of them are the same.
Do your siblings know that?
They do.
No?
They do. So I did eventually test them all. Well, except for my older brother who lives in Hawaii and wants nothing to do with this. But his son actually took a test. So I was able to interpret his son's test. So I never figured out who his dad was, and I will not. He has 2 matches. 2.
Wow.
2.
That's bizarre.
Real. So I know that his father's probably a foreigner in the military, because he was born actually in a military base in Michigan. And so I can tell that just knowing genealogy as I do now, DNA, his dad's going to be a foreigner. However, I did identify and locate the father for my little sister and my little brother. And my little sister's dad was also gone. And my brother's dad was alive, but had a very severe stroke and was unable to communicate. So his wife just didn't want anything to do with it. So we know enough to know who they are and their living children. And my sister actually has developed a relationship with her biological father's children as well.
Oh, that's
and
nice.
So have I. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So what kind of healing did you have to go through to decide you wanted to help other people with this?
I think I just needed time to process. So I'm kind of like a type A personality, and I don't show a lot of emotion. That doesn't mean I don't feel it. I just process it in my brain. I am joining support groups because I need that, right? I need to be able to read what the heck to do to process these emotions that I'm feeling because nobody around you really understands, right? So a wonderful person added me to their Facebook group, and within that Facebook group, it started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and people were coming in just making these discoveries, and they were saying, I really need help figuring out who my dad is. And so I would volunteer my time to look at it, and I didn't know anything really back then. I had solved my own case, so I thought, hey, I would help you, right? But it actually worked. And what the patterns that emerged from my case, I could see within other people's DNA as well. And then obviously I was not taking classes, but I was reading a lot. I was watching YouTube videos and just taking free webinars here and there to try and understand, the DNA a little bit better. I formed a bondship with a group of friends there, and we eventually just walked away from that group and formed our own group because we wanted to be available to work more than just cases where it was a DNA surprise, right?
Mhm.
There were donor conceived people and adoptees and those who just never know who their dad was. They were all in the same situation. So I didn't want to box myself in. So when I left, a few of them came with me and we started DNAngels. And one thing led to another, and it really just has grown organically, kind of like a grassroots thing. Not to say that there wasn't a lot of effort behind, how we grew. It really has been from pain came this amazing organization that's been able to help a little over 9,000 people right now.
What steps do you prefer people to take if they want to get in touch, if they need an angel?
Before you do anything, you have to take a test with the ancestry. I can't help you if you don't test because I am a genetic genealogist. We don't follow paper trails. We don't follow stories. We follow the actual science. So first test with DNAngels. And then if you're on Facebook, you can look up DNAngels screening room. But remember that DNAngels is one word, 1A. So it's DNAngels. It's not two words. And then if you don't use Facebook, you can just go to DNAngels.org, DNAangels.org. We will work with you via email instead of through like Facebook. But the fastest way to get in and through and processed and start your case is Facebook right now.
Well, Laura, you might be aware that the final question that we ask every guest is that when you were going through this discovery and the trauma and everything, is there a musical artist or a song or a genre that you leaned on?
Okay, so I don't know if I listened to it back then, but it's absolutely been my song for years now. And it is Fight Song by Rachel Platten. I am a fighter, and just the words in that song just really do indicate who I am. So this is my fight song, Take Back My Life song. My power's turned on. I'm going to be strong. I will not let it defeat me.
It's inspirational for sure.
Yeah, people need to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for the work that you've done, helping all these people find their people or get their answers. And, we'll just keep watching DNAngels grow.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was so nice being on.
All right, that was our time with Laura Olmsted. Every time Kendall and I talk to someone working in this space, whether it's an advocate, a researcher, or someone who has lived through a discovery themselves, we're reminded just how many people are still out there looking for answers. What Laura and the team at DNAngels have built is honestly remarkable. Thousands of cases solved, families reunited, long-standing mysteries finally answered. And a lot of that work is being done by volunteers who simply understand how important truth can be. Laura's story also touches on something we hear again and again on this podcast. The truth does not erase the past, and it doesn't always fix the pain. But for many people, it's the beginning of understanding who they really are. If you or somebody you know is trying to make sense of a DNA surprise, you can learn more about Laura's organization at DNAangels.org, and we'll include the link in the show notes. As always, Kendall and I thank you for listening to Family Twist. And if this episode resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Until next week, remember, family secrets are the ultimate plot twist. The Family Twist podcast is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications and produced by Mosaic Multimedia.